Hello, dear learners, and in this session, let us go through Introduction to Economic Systems and Capitalism. We are surrounded by goods and services that cater to our needs, to the wider needs of the society, nation, and the world. Have you ever noticed that between two regions, goods and services might differ in which category and is in more demand or supply? It brings us to an important question. Collectively, how does a society decide what to produce, in what quantities to produce, how to produce, and who would enjoy the benefits? The answer is economic system, a society's method for producing, allocating resources, and distributing products and services are collectively referred as its economic system. By the end of this session, you will be able to explain the concept of economic systems, identify the economic issues that economic systems solve, examine the fundamentals of capitalism, identify the features of capitalism, assess the concept of laissez-faire economics, its guiding principles and real-world examples, and critically analyze the merits and drawbacks of laissez-faire capitalism. Let us begin with understanding economic systems, the way that societies or governments arrange and allocate the resources, goods, and services that are accessible throughout a nation or geographic area is known as economic system. So this will include allocating the limited resources available for production, followed by production and distribution of goods and services. Therefore, economic systems will govern land, capital, labor, and physical resources. So these are the components of production. If economic systems were to be explained in simpler terms, it would refer to a community's entire economic structure. Since we have already talked about how a community's economic structure and the interconnectedness of their components from economic systems, organizations, agencies, and entities would include institutions, businesses, regulatory and governmental bodies. So they manage, regulate, and ensure that there is effective utilization of resources to produce and distribute goods and services. Next comes the decisions about what to produce, how to produce, and for whom. For all such, there are processes and procedures, including both government policies and consumer demands. As we were discussing above, other than the two components, consumption patterns of consumers is also another component. Consumption patterns will define demand in any economy based on your understanding. What could be some factors that influence consumption patterns? Do you see a similar consumption pattern across countries? Since we have understood the basic concepts of economic systems, we will move to the four basic economic issues that the economic system tackle. This determine what kind of an economic system exists. First, what types of commodities should be produced and in what quantities? Here, the theory of pricing comes into play because the rise and fall of prices act as signals in marketplaces which then guide how the resources are allocated. This also determines the balance between an economist's choice of producing capital goods and consumer goods, keeping in mind the needs of the economy. Next question is, how should the goods be produced? And the most profitable approach involves finding the least cost method to produce, such as labor intensive or capital intensive processes. How should the output be distributed to customers? It requires increasing the efficiency of distribution chains. Finally, when to produce? This requires analysis of time dynamics and seasonal fluctuations while meeting consumer demands. The solution to these basic issues will differ according to the type of economic systems. Now, We will move to specific economic systems, starting with capitalism. The definition of capitalism relies on three main points. First is the private ownership and management of land, labor, and capital, which are components of production as we had discussed earlier. Second, the market supply and demand, which determines the market prices. Third, and the core characteristic, is the motive and drive to turn a profit. Adam Smith is considered as the father of modern economics. According to him, people do not rely on the benevolence of others to be provided with goods. It is in the self interest of others to produce goods to people. This idea highlights that the self interest of individuals drives voluntary economic exchanges, leading to overall economic prosperity. We have understood capitalism in theory. Let us now explore capitalism in practice. Skills and time of labor are exchanged for wages. Meanwhile, private owners receive capital gains from the growth of their assets. As discussed previously, pricing mechanisms guide the allocation of resources based on supply and demand. Here, the resources will also include labor and capital. Moreover, capital assets like factories, mines, and railroads can be privately owned and controlled. Examples of capitalism in practice are all around us. Some of them include our employment for compensation, capital gains from stocks, prices determining which product is more produced, and the private ownership of factories like Tata and Reliance. Can you think to add any more? Now, there are other economic systems, but capitalism has remained the dominant system in most countries since last century. We have explored capitalism, but now we will dive into a more detailed study. We will study the essential features of capitalism. Some of them we have already covered previously while understanding the concept of capitalism. So, firstly, private property is a cornerstone, allowing individuals to acquire and use property as they wish, protected by law. This is a freedom that individuals have in a capitalist system. Property rights are not just limited to the living. Upon death, ownership passes to one's heirs through inheritance. This system encourages the accumulation of wealth and investment. The right to acquire, hold, and pass down property is a fundamental principle supported by capitalism. We have been continuously discussing the importance of the price mechanism. In capitalism, the supply and demand operate freely without any interference, which benefits both the producers and the consumers. Therefore, every economic activity, including saving, investing, exchanging, distributing, and consuming, follows its guidelines. As a result, Adam Smith referred to the price mechanism as the invisible hand. Profit motive is another essential feature, but why would it be a primary driver of economic activity in capitalism? It is easy to explain from examples around us. Entrepreneurs launch businesses or professions where they can maximize their earnings. Similarly, the companies that are making losses are either shut down or they pivot to generate and maximize profits. To enable the profit motive, entrepreneurs would also need a chance to do so. This is reflected in another key feature of capitalism, which is free competition. Businesses compete for profit. Consumers compete for goods and services. Employees compete with each other for jobs. Employees also compete with machines for performing tasks. However, it is not possible for a system to work if there is just competition. Along with competition, there is cooperation, like the machines and the employees working together to maintain efficiency and quality. An interesting example is consumers joining forces through reviews and social media to demand accountability from companies. Individuals have the freedom to launch any business and pursue any career path that they find fit for themselves. Another important feature is considering consumers as sovereign rulers because their preference guide production. As they buy and consumers goods and services sold by businesses, their preferences control the entire production process. Key features of capitalism. In capitalism, class conflict is a constant theme. Due to this system, the society gets divided into haves and have nots. Haves are those who own labor, capital, and resources, while the have nots are workers. This creates a perpetual class and presents itself as a core feature of capitalism with no easy resolution in sight. Then we have joint stock companies where shareholders will vote to elect a board of directors that run and oversees the business. Sometimes they are referred to as democratic capitalism because of this process. However, large companies own a majority of a company's shares and their votes outnumber others, giving them power to control decisions. Lastly, the base of capitalism is the entrepreneurial class. They drive economic activity and foster competition and innovation, which helps in the economic growth. We will now explore an economic ideology known as laissez faire. The core principle or the fundamental tenet is that businesses and society will prosper with a lesser economic or commercial interference by the government. According to this ideology, economic rivalry or economic competition is a natural order that governs the world. It is a form of natural self regulation, and what is natural is the best. Therefore, any intervention done by governments in businesses and industrial matters is unnecessary. These natural forces should govern the market. What do you think would be the result of such an ideology in today's world? The ideology opposes minimum wages, duties, trade restrictions, corporate taxation, legislative laws, and oversight by the government. In fact, the taxes that are levied are viewed as a penalty on production. Now, since we have a basic understanding of the laissez-faire concept, a brief historical overview will produce more context on its origin and the subsequent spread. The origins of the concept are traced to the 18th century, which was pioneered by the physiocrats in France. The group used scientific methods to examine wealth and economic production. According to them, the well being of a free society was based on a free market and free economic competition with minimal government interference. Later, British economist Adam Smith coined the idea of the invisible hand. We just talked about the free market and economic processes. This is the invisible hand. The government can intervene, but to protect property, life, and individual freedom. An experiment was carried out in 1774 by Turgot, Controller General of Finance in France, on the highly regulated grains business. Restrictions were removed. However, when bad harvest happened, there were shortages, resulting in high prices, hoarding of suppliers by traders, or selling of grains in specific locations for profits. This led to widespread hunger and riots, forcing government intervention. However, laissez-faire policies saw a rise in influence during the Industrial Revolution, despite criticisms for poor working conditions and income disparities. What are the principles guiding laissez-faire capitalism? The first and foremost is considering an individual as the fundamental unit of society, focusing on their freedom and autonomy. Continuing from this, everyone has the right to personal independence, which means there are no unnecessary interventions by the government. Natural self regulation was covered while understanding laissez faire. It means nature has the ability to control itself. Another premise of this ideology is a free market economy based on supply and demand, automatically fixing the market. Another important premise is rational market theory. The theory assumes that the investors, while making investments, make decisions based on proper facts and reasons instead of emotions. In the world, it has not been observed that any nation has completely followed the laissez faire principles, but some of the tenets have been implemented by the governments worldwide. Those are the real world examples to discuss. Firstly, let us start with trickle down economics. This theory suggests that whatever benefits are provided to wealthy individuals or businesses will eventually seep down to the mass population. The government will subsequently reduce interference and the resulting additional wealth created by such individuals or businesses will be invested in creating jobs, increasing opportunities, increasing wages, and others. To give you an example, for the initial few years after independence, India's economic system followed this theory. Another example is the tax cuts by the government to boost market. This allows the market to operate more freely. When the government sells off the public assets managed and governed by them, it reduces their interference. This is another example of laissez faire. Laissez faire policies have some key benefits that drive economic growth. First, it encourages international trade. The countries gain from each other's dealings. Secondly, it reduces government red tape. Thus, the businesses can operate more efficiently. With lower interference from the government, business owners are motivated to take chances, work harder, and increase production without restrictions. Moreover, the new companies also have benefits because they also have the freedom to take risks and grow their businesses. Thus, it promotes innovation and creativity without constraints. Without taxes, businesses enjoy increased purchasing power. So, you can understand that an environment is created where businesses innovate and prosper. Competition is fair and healthy, and the economies grow. The benefits of laissez faire promote free markets and better competition. However, the policy has its drawbacks. It often leads to income inequality and wealth disparity. The success of trickle down economies has been mixed. Thus, often the rich continue to get richer while the others are left behind. Similarly, the wealth gets concentrated within a few well established groups, creating high barriers to entry and survival for startups. Without control and regulation, monopolies can form. They drive up prices and limit supply for the customers. Also, one of the guiding principles method about laissez-faire economists believed in rational market theory. However, markets are not always rational, but according to the policy, human emotions like fear or greed remain ignored. If we were to conclude about the laissez faire policy, it is evident that the principles are not enough and are too stringent to build a stable economy on its own. However, the principles can foster innovation, business expansion, and growth. Minimizing government regulations lead to negative consequences like inequality, and disparity. Therefore, most capitalist economies opt for a more balanced approach. This means that taxation and regulation are introduced to address the social concerns. Now, let us summarize. In this topic, you have learned the definitions of economic systems and the key issues they resolve, fundamentals of capitalism and its key features, key tenets of laissez-faire economics, along with its guiding principles and real-world examples to enhance understanding and criticisms and benefits of laissez-faire capitalism. With this, we come to the end of the session. Thank you and happy learning.